Yeah, we're good.
Great. Yeesh.
I'm gonna get rid of this fake background. Hold
See what your real,
for my
Dealio looks like.
that's for my other meetings, I guess. There we go.
I'm just so used to your other background that this looks fake too. You're like kind of brighter. You must have like good lighting.
Yeah, well, it's just because I have a window right behind
Oh, okay,
the
gotcha.
camera. The blinds are closed, but the light still like gets in, you know.
Yeah, I don't know how to. I guess I could turn, but then I don't have a cable. So let's make do.
Nice, sweet. Well, glad we could do this, you know, virtually.
Yeah, totally.
Let's see the cool. I mean, I don't really have like any topics and anything, but we'll just jump into it and then we'll
Sounds good.
talk about whatever. I mean, we could talk about COVID, obviously.
Yeah. When was the last time you did a podcast?
I mean, it's probably been a couple of months now because, yeah, I basically kind of shelved any plans once things started rolling and like
Mhm.
it was getting clear that things were going to get shut down.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been planning on doing a couple podcasts with some other people in the biomedical engineering department.
Okay.
Yeah.
Over like the Zoom platform and stuff like that.
Well, no, they were the in-person ones, and then once things like started closing down, and then there was that one email where like, all right, we're all off campus. That just like
Yeah.
came out of nowhere. Then we're just like,
Gotcha.
oh, we'll just show this for a later time, and I just haven't had time to reschedule those.
Yeah.
But
Have you had a chance to like integrate your work to more online based, or are you still basically able to do stuff online?
yeah, luckily my research is mostly computational, as
Okay.
is, and like before this, I had actually just set up a remote server like on in our lab space that I could remote into. So luckily I
Oh,
did that.
cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Yeah.
It's good
So
that you're able to do that and not have to I don't know, have too much to change and stuff like that.
yeah, it's pretty tough for some of the other individuals who have to
Mm-hmm.
work with, you know, cells or live specimens, you know, because that really puts a massive delay in their research. And if you had experiments that were running, you know, prior to that, they're basically just shot experiments and you can't keep those things alive. So
Yeah, yeah. I think they were able to. There are some like I'm sure research projects that are like they considered more essential and not essential. So I think there are still a few people on campus that are doing like the more like time sensitive stuff.
yeah.
But you're right. There's probably a greater majority of people that had to like just completely press pause on their stuff.
Yeah, I mean I know one of my friends is considered one of those long-term projects that he got exempt for, so he's going on campus still, but everyone else in his lab was not.
Okay.
So yeah, so he's like the only one in his lab that's there. Uh, but a lot of the BME department is definitely shifted to COVID-related projects.
Hmm.
You know, there's a lot of work in how to re-sterilize N95s, you know, improve PAPRs, etc.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a lot of research going on that's pretty cool, actually, and I think will definitely help. Um, a lot of it's going to UCI Medical Center, obviously, first as kind of like
Hmm.
the main testing zone.
They
So
just started. Did they just start using the N95 respirator repurposers? Because I saw an email regarding something like that.
I mean, a lot of them are experimental, so probably. I mean, they're trying to get them out as fast as possible, you know. But there's just
Gotcha.
not a lot of existing, you know, experimentation on how to even re-sterilize those materials, you know,
Hmm.
because people just never had to think about that before. Like
Yeah.
in the medical field, you know, pretty much everything you use in clinical setting, you just immediately discard, you know, for sanitation purposes. So like now that they're looking at these things, it's like, oh, well, we've never even tried to sterilize some of these things before, so we have no idea what the materials will do under, you know, sterilization conditions.
Hmm.
Um, so it's pretty interesting. I think it'll be cool to see what does work, and a lot of things are being tried. But yeah, I think that luckily in California, at least, we were definitely not hit nearly as hard as um, New York, obviously, but
Yeah.
that gave us a little bit of leeway to get things out to where they needed to be. Um, Yeah, I don't know how it's going with the med school right now. How are things going with you guys?
Well, it like I think with everyone else, it just ended up being something where it just took everyone by surprise. And so, luckily for kind of like the second years, we had already been in the process of transitioning to our dedicated board studying time. So basically, we already have like about a month to about a month and a half of allocated time at the end of our second year to just have no classes, no clinical duties, and study for what's called the USMLE Step 1. It's the first out of 3 exams that you take to get your medical license. And this one's particularly important because you're given like a 3-digit score, and that score is basically like the SAT or the MCAT. It basically determines your competitiveness for certain specialties, certain regions. Like if you wanted to practice, on either side of the coasts, basically, those tend to be a little more competitive in terms of what score you need to get in order to do those residencies there. And so, so it kind of, I guess, worked out in a way for the second years in terms of not interrupting our schedule as much. But obviously, in hindsight, our schedule ended up getting interrupted anyways because every single week it seemed like the extension of the stay-at-home orders was extended by another 2 weeks. And this was starting all the way back in March. And so I guess no one could have anticipated this whole thing going as long as it did, but it has. And so a lot of people actually had to completely reschedule their tests to be taken later in the year, like towards December or even next year. Which is a little bit of a bummer because you've been spending so much time already studying for it to be taken within the next couple of weeks. And so a couple of my classmates and I were fortunate enough to, as far as we know, be able to test next week. But a lot of people have had their appointments canceled and moved around and rescheduled. And so it's kind of a toss-up in the air.
Yeah.
And most everyone else has moved on to like online distance learning, like what they're doing in the undergraduate campus. So all the first years are learning online. They're learning their clinical skills online, which is definitely something newer that is a little, it's definitely something that, obviously it's difficult to replace that kind of in-person aspect of being able to have, like, for example, a standardized patient where you can practice your skills on, but they're definitely making do. So,
I mean, it's definitely something that has kind of been talked about in the medical field for a while anyways, because I know a lot of biomedical engineering departments have been looking into like how do you incorporate like a VR augmented reality clinical supplement to the existing clinical training. Because like right now it's like obviously that clinical training is like super important because like you're there with the patient and that type of thing. But the difficult thing for hospitals is just like scheduling all of that, like with the number of residents that and like medical students that are already trying to get into these like clinical settings. Like there's sometimes just isn't like, the capacity or the space to have everyone jammed in a room like that.
Yeah.
So like they've been trying to make systems that kind of give the same experience, but the quality is just not the same as being in person still. And like, I mean, I think the hope is eventually it'll allow more people to get the necessary skills to become doctors because of like the shortage that we have in medical personnel in general. But we're still kind of a far ways off from that, I think.
Yeah, I actually participated in a study where they used the augmented reality a couple of months ago. It was super interesting for sure. I think it was like we had an example of like a scenario that involved like an infant. And so they were able to, it was augmented reality. So they were able to like superimpose an infant onto like a physical, like in-person exam table. And it was definitely like super interesting, but it was like a simulation and the kid wasn't feeling well, but obviously like there's limitations on like what the baby could do. I mean, obviously the baby didn't look well and was breathing like too fast and was using too much energy to breathe. But obviously like the baby can't like, respond to like you touching it and stuff like that because it's not there.
Yeah.
And you can't like use your stethoscope and actually listen. But it was definitely like a kind of interesting experience that I think they're continuing to kind of refine and see how, I guess, what place does something like augmented reality have in medical education. was fun. I mean, it was just cool, just having like a heads up display and being able to like integrate that virtual component. So that was really cool.
Yeah, who knows? 10 years, we'll probably look back and be like, oh wow, things
Yeah.
are pretty insane. Because I mean, also just like the barriers to entry to getting started with those technologies is definitely dropping in cost too.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
even a lot of the undergraduate biomedical engineering design projects they're able to like set up very basic systems for VR and AR as is. You can just go buy like an Oculus for like, cheap one for 300, $400, and then
Yeah.
you have all the open source stuff online, and you can kind of cobble together a somewhat functioning, system. So yeah, there's a lot of potential there, but definitely I think implementing that in a medical education setting is still going to be somewhat of a problem. And, a lot of hospitals also don't necessarily have that as a super high priority because there's a lot of more
Yeah.
important
Yeah.
things
I
to
understand.
figure out.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that albeit like if this whole thing resolves eventually, hopefully, a lot of hospitals are moving towards integrating the medical students into the clinical training parts a lot earlier. Just because I think medical education at large, I think we talked about it a little while ago, was that um, like a lot of the training has kind of moved online, and we're seeing that kind of moved at 100-fold now, specifically because you can only do things online. So
Yeah.
it's just been a really interesting kind of a situation to see how education at large is trying to kind of transition into distance learning, independent learning, things like that. And you're right, obviously it works for some things better than others.
Yeah. I think it can be beneficial, but obviously I think we've been doing online classes, and that's very difficult for an engineering senior design project where you're kind of expected to like physically make something.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of the projects have just been completely shelved because like people don't just have laser cutters and like 3D printers in their house. Like 3D
Yeah.
printers maybe nowadays, but you don't have a nice 3D printer to like prototype like
Mm-hmm.
make the things you need to make. So and when you're trying to manufacture things, like that's very difficult to do in a virtual team environment.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it'll be interesting to see, um, yeah, how companies, even medical device companies, are going to respond to this because it'll be a lot of challenges. Like I know a lot of the biotech companies in Irvine, like they're also going like major reduction in production lines and stuff like that. So I'm not sure how that's going
Yeah.
to affect, medical devices and supply and stuff, but
I think like right now, the things that are in demand are going to continue being in demand. Like obviously, like masks and the reagents for like the testing kits and things like that. And then basically everything else I think has taken a back burner. So like other reagent kits and like basically stuff that you've been using for experiments and stuff like that. I think
mm-hmm.
definitely fallen behind a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Have you been keeping up with just how things are proceeding with, virus, COVID stuff, updates, any of that?
Yeah, it's kind of hard, I guess. I mean, I guess everyone's doing it, but I mean, I've never been like more in tune with the news now than I've been ever. So I think everyone's kind of been inundated with information about what's going on, what's the government's response, what's the virus doing, how's it affecting our lives, how it's affecting other people's lives and businesses and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. So yeah, the it's been pretty pervasive in terms of how impactful this virus has been on basically everyone's life. So I guess specifically from a medical standpoint, what's been interesting is to see, I guess, the healthcare response to how prepared we were for an outbreak like this, and definitely like a lot of learning opportunities. So obviously, I think it goes without saying that our country has been like pretty impacted by this virus more than what was originally thought, maybe 2-3 months ago. And so, with that, I think there was kind of this realization that I don't think our system was ever prepared for something like this. and contingency plans and preparedness. We weren't ready for it. So a lot of like the medical decisions were reactive in terms of needing to get like ventilators for people who would go into acute respiratory distress in order to mechanically ventilate them because they can't do it themselves, to how are we able to approach it from a public health standpoint of, for example, in Orange County, I think they implemented the stay-at-home order last month around mid-March, and that resulted from just this realization that we weren't prepared for something like this. So I think that the reactive kind of measure that was taken was to just keep everyone at home, stop non-essential businesses, and try to kind of contain the spread of that virus. So there's a fair amount of like clinical medical science and then public health that's kind of intermixing, and I think definitely have taken kind of like a very high stance in everyone's life. I guess the general population at large probably doesn't know exactly what the term epidemiology means, for example. And now, it's commonplace to see graphs of epidemiological measures, things that I guess the general public weren't aware of, or things that were measured that suddenly become kind of the forefront of the national attention that people have placed towards seeing how fast the virus is spreading, if the measures that we're undertaking are effective, things like that. So
yeah,
it's definitely been a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's just also interesting because like we still don't know like really that much about the virus. Like there's a lot of like theories about why New York was so much more heavily impacted than the rest of the country, and like, but no one really has like a definitive answer on that.
Yeah,
and it seems very inconsistent on like how, for like California was hit pretty hard in I think like the Bay Area, like Santa Clara County I think had a lot of pretty high cases and high case fatality rate, but Southern California is a bit muted compared to that, and it's a little bit odd because there's just as many people, and it's kind of weird because like I don't know if like there's definitely like we know for sure that like age is a great factor on like susceptibility. I think most of the studies like definitely agree on that, and then like a lot of the scientific information is like pretty conflicting on what symptoms are even, and like there's a lot of studies that are like, oh well, like we're pretty sure that contagion happens before symptoms, like transmission happens before symptoms appear.
Yeah,
so that's a huge difference from when we started. Also,
and like how contagion happens, like is it through like is it just airborne, is it just floating around in the air, is it by respiratory droplets? All those kinds of questions definitely still even today have a certain element of uncertainty.
I don't know what you're hearing from UCI Medical, but I know like at Long Beach Medical they were going back and forth between airborne and droplet precaution for a solid like 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, I think I think we're generally erring on the side of like respiratory precautions, not necessarily airborne. And I think all these, and I think the decision at large, at least in Orange County, of how we're approaching the virus has been mostly based off the preliminary studies about people actually studying the virus itself and seeing how it propagates. But again, nothing is ever definitive, and so I think that people are still not 100% sure how it's spreading. But it was interesting to, like, for example, I think in Orange County, they've implemented like a pretty universal masking policy, not just in the hospitals, but like at large. That was definitely something that wasn't talked about at all, basically, until it became more apparent that the virus is propagating a lot faster and more broadly than we thought. And that was actually a pretty interesting part, just to see that kind of evolve, because originally I think that a lot of the public health experts were like, you don't need to necessarily mask up. They're primarily concerned that I think the supply chain of masks purchased by consumers would have affected the supply chain of the hospitals.
Yeah, which it did.
Although I think, yeah, it did. Yeah, there's a little bit of intermixing there. So I think that the original kind of recommendation of not using masks, for example, was based off A, they wanted to reserve it for the people who are frontline in the healthcare settings, and B, just because it still wasn't fully understood exactly how the virus was propagating. So that was definitely something really interesting to see these past couple of weeks, how that has evolved.
Yeah, I think, I mean, there are pretty promising results, I guess, about treatments. So there are a lot of things in the FDA pipeline. We'll see which ones actually make it out.
Yeah, I think I looked at clinicaltrials.gov and there was like maybe 4 or 5 studies, maybe at the earlier last month, and now there are like hundreds. And so now there's a ton of stuff coming out.
Yeah, I think some of those early studies are making it through the later stages now, which is pretty incredible for the FDA because clinical trials usually take like 2 to 5 years in most cases.
Yeah,
So, like,
it's definitely ramped up.
yeah,
The vaccine, I think there are like quite a few iterations of the vaccine, but so those are still in phase 1. So those might take a while to actually hit the market at large. You know, people estimate that you probably won't see them actually being used on a population standpoint until next year.
yeah, probably not till like middle of next year, earliest.
Yeah. But the remdesivir, which is one of the examples of the antivirals, that I think they're crunching the data right now, but apparently it's looking promising, and those were phase 3, and so it'll be interesting to see how they will use that drug in this fight against the virus.
Yeah, I think Dr. Fauci actually made like first official positive comments on remdesivir like yesterday. So that's like very recent, you know. But if it's coming from NIH, that's a pretty good sign that they're
Yeah.
at least hopeful that. I mean, I guess the big thing about this is that it doesn't cure the virus; it just reduces viral load, from what I've read at least. But that's still huge because you could probably speak more to this, but like I think if you reduce viral load, that also gives your immune system time to like catch up and hopefully prevent people from getting to that stage where they need a ventilator, right?
Yeah, it's an antiviral that I think specifically works to reduce the viral load, and yeah, you I think you nailed it. It slows down the spread of the virus inside your body so that your immune system is able to kind of eventually get sensitized to the virus in the first place, which is probably one of the reasons why people get so sick, is because the virus is unique in a sense that your body doesn't necessarily have the recognition, didn't necessarily recognize it as foreign until later in the process as it's been allowed to propagate. And so just slowing that process down probably allows your immune system extra time to recognize it as a foreign, something foreign inside your body, and then subsequently mount a response. But yeah, it's really hopeful. I think it was really developed for Ebola, which is another type of RNA virus, like coronavirus is, except it was used. I think the main purpose of it was all the way back during the Ebola outbreak, where they were trying to control it there, and it didn't quite work for Ebola. So it was kind of surprising and interesting to see how they kind of just dug this kind of archived drug that didn't work for one virus and applied it to this virus, and it seems like it's been having a positive effect.
Yeah, I mean, the viruses they're their whole entire own field of study. You have virology, but they're very, very interesting because like they're highly protein dependent in some cases, but their entire like goal is genetic propagation. So like hijacking your cells to make their DNA and RNA. So it kind of like makes sense that some medicines might work for some viruses, but also like some of the viruses are very different from each other.
Yeah.
Like coronavirus is like a family of viruses on its own. But influenza is like a completely different virus, and like the common cold is also a completely different virus. So it'll be interesting to see like what happens, because some of these could potentially be used in other viral cases, and we just might not know because like there's too many possible like iterations of trying these different things on different viruses. And in the end, like I think our immune systems typically, if they can do it, work better than drugs. So
yeah, I mean the drugs, most of the drugs out there that are antimicrobial tend to be more like slow the spread versus completely stop it. It's usually the immune system that does the eventual cleaning up of the house and stuff. Pretty remarkable how redundant and how complex our immune systems are, for sure.
It's insane. I mean, even like for cancer, which is like more of what I study, like some of the new methods are basically like gene therapy using viruses as a tool to trigger your own immune system to like clean up the cancer cells itself.
Yeah, I mean, because I think a good amount of the cancers, one of the like the hallmarks of cancer cell, and correct me if I'm wrong, is its ability to evade the detection by the immune system. And so, how exactly? I don't know. In a nutshell, how do you feel like that viruses have been used specifically to help your immune system detect those bad cells?
Yeah, I think from my understanding is what a lot of the targeted gene therapies, like their primary mode of getting so I guess what gene therapy is, like you're editing a specific gene within your cells to allow for your immune system to take out the cancer cells. Mm-hmm. So you have a couple like hurdles in that. First, like you need a way to make sure that whatever gene you're editing edits only the cancer cells. So there's usually cancer cells express certain surface proteins that kind of make it a hallmark cancer cell. So you can kind of target those as like receptors, but to actually get the DNA into a cell, like the best tool we actually know that does that is a virus, because that's what viruses do, is they attach to a cell and they inject, their DNA into the cell, and that's like what a virus does. So some of the targeted gene therapies is they use a specific virus that is, been specifically genetically engineered for this, so it doesn't actually harm you, but they implant that gene. It integrates with, it only targets the cancer genes, hopefully. That's the goal. And then those genes, either, there's a couple of ways you could do it. You could either have the gene be a gene that programs cell death automatically, or you have a gene that, makes those cells exhibit another surface protein, which can be targeted by a drug. So like, or your own immune system, right? So like, because these genes these cancer cells are really good at hiding, if you can get the cancer cells to express things that your immune system recognizes as foreign, then your immune system will automatically go for it. So you don't even need drugs, hopefully. And it's very, very complicated, obviously, but it's kind of elegant in a way. It's like,
it's remarkable. Yeah.
It's remarkable, but it's a lot of different pieces, like different pieces of nature that you have to make work correctly. So there have been, like it only works for certain cancers again too, because like, your cancer, depending on where it's in its body, it's like also has a different cell morphology and stuff like that. But that's kind of the general principle about how gene therapy works. Most of them are actually transmitted through viral vectors. There might be other ways that I'm not aware of. But yeah, like the virus is still like the most effective way that we kind of know to directly inject, genetic material into a cell.
Yeah. At least in from a clinical standpoint, that stuff is super forefront, because I think we're still kind of seeing the after effects of the advent of like biologics. So a lot of the kind of the chimeric antibodies or antibody therapy, and that has blown up in the past, the past 5 to 10 years. And so it's just really cool to see how fast, like, biomedical technology advances, especially in this day and age, where a lot of the advances have come as a result of advances, not necessarily in understanding clinical science better, but being able to process information faster. I think is one of the hallmarks of how fast technology has definitely progressed. And so, yeah, hopefully all that can be translated into outbreaks like such as what we're seeing right now, and for cancer therapy. And I don't know, I'm sure they're finding new ways of applying it to ways we haven't even thought of before.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about being in the medical field is that you get a lot of solutions that come from other fields, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like nowadays, when you go into a clinical setting, like it's pretty common to find some sort of laser-based device. Um, but lasers were originally developed as a Department of Defense project.
Hmm. Like
And
what were they originally used for, or do you know?
I don't know exactly. I think part of it is probably like either communications, like satellite
Uh-huh.
communications, or weaponry.
Mm-hmm.
So, but nowadays, like there's a lot of medical procedures that are laser-based medical procedures. You have
Yeah.
LASIK and that type of stuff. Um, so it just took someone like, hey, let's use a laser on someone.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and then also MRI is like that's an entire another thing. Like that's all physics basically.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's electromagnetism, massive magnets, and someone who was a physicist must have had a friend or someone who was working in the medical field and they're like, hey, what if we like put a person in this, and they're able to get images back of the insides of a person using these magnets, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah. And very beautiful, like very like detailed images too.
Yeah, like that technology in itself is actually insane because
Mm-hmm.
I took a class on it like a couple of years ago, and it involves a lot of quantum physics, like not just like regular physics, like quantum physics.
Yeah, I had to dabble, and it's not for me.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very like mathematically complex what they do,
Yeah,
but it's pretty crazy. So
yeah.
I think like in terms of just of all the times like this type of thing could happen, I think we're sure there's a lot of uncertainty, right? But like we're in a pretty good position, I think, technologically speaking, to be able to combat this.
Hmm.
And I don't know. I think that there's a lot of reasons to be positive.
Yeah. Um, I guess have from your standpoint, what have you seen like in the culture that culture at large that you feel has been kind of impacted by all of what we're seeing now?
Mm. I think if anything, it's kind of revealed where people put their value,
Hmm.
if that makes sense. I think from my perspective, like obviously I think this is like a very like serious issue that needs to be addressed medically, but at the end of the day, like I don't feel anxious about things. Um, and I think part of that is just where I put, my value. It's not necessarily my work, um, even though that's important, and it's not necessarily my ability to go out and about. Um, but I think what I've noticed is that, people definitely react differently under stress. And typically when that happens, it reveals where people's, most important, where they put the most important value of their
Hmm.
life on. And it kind of reveals in our culture that we definitely have a very huge idolization of work.
Hmm.
I think to a degree that is probably unhealthy. And I kind of have experienced that also because if you travel abroad, like people's perspective on work is very different than the American perspective on work. Um,
How so?
I think we definitely are more work obsessed. Even if you go to like other Western countries like in Europe, like the perspective on work is like, yeah, work is still important, but it's not this all-consuming thing that it typically is in the United States.
Mm.
Um, and I think that's just been very interesting to see that like it's easy to not think about that because you're always working. And now that people have all this time, like, and people are also losing jobs, unfortunately, like there is a kind of a reassessment of like what is the most important thing in life. And I think that's
Yeah.
interesting to see. It is kind of saddening to see how some people react to it.
Mm-hmm.
I think, you know, obviously, I don't know if you've experienced this, but going to the grocery store is a very interesting experience now. And I think it's very clear to see that people get frustrated very easily in those situations and are a bit more selfish than they might think they are, and myself included. Like, I'm speaking from experience too. Like, um, those like little things that like pop out, where like, oh, maybe there is like a deeper issue there that needs to be addressed. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I've definitely noticed how this whole pandemic has like exposed a lot of like underlying cultural motifs that um, have definitely been compounded by all this going on. You're right. Like I was I've seen multiple situations of customers blowing up at at associates for reasons that are just like, hey, it doesn't seem like normal to have to get upset about those things, but I think definitely what you're talking about kind of just the culture of busyness in our country is definitely something that has had to take another look at itself right now because um, uh, they're kind of I've been reading a couple I've heard of a couple of books that have talked about the idea of like the hustle, right? That you gotta like get bread, make money, have fun, kind of deal, and that seems to be like the epitome of a lot of people's where they find worth and success and happiness is being able to work hard and subsequently enjoy themselves because they've worked so hard. And while like I think that is healthy to a standpoint of having a motivation to always improve on yourself and look for ways to kind of expand your knowledge and things like that. At the same time, you're right. I think it's been kind of detrimental in a sense that if everything was taken away in a sense that your job was taken away or your not necessarily your job but like your daily routine and your career advancement was suddenly halted. It definitely definitely puts quite a strain on like your mental well-being. I've seen it personally in in the medicine community, a sense of like for us as medical students, a lot of us were actually sidelined because of all this, because the personal protective equipment, the PPE, had to be reserved for people who were actually working with sick patients, and so a lot of us medical students were sidelined. And so I've definitely found myself in a position where, having to examine where all my motivation lies and where I develop intrinsic worth, and I think compounded with the fact that I'm studying for a test that's supposed to essentially give you a numerical score to determine your worth for specific specialties and stuff like that. It's had to make me think a little bit inside about what I determine to be important values to myself and characterizing what how I view myself, what makes me worth. Period. So yeah, a lot of those things are coming out right now. It's kind of interesting to see.
Yeah. I mean, my hope is that like people come out of this hopefully a little bit more grateful,
Mm-hmm.
just about like the little things in life. And um, we are lucky to live in a place that has the resources that it does. And I think um, like I'm not always great at acknowledging that. And I think as a society at large, we do have a tendency to complain about things sometimes.
Yeah, we do.
It's just like, oh, we gotta complain about this and we gotta complain about this because it's not perfect. And it's like, there's a lot of things that aren't perfect, but it's also not as terrible as it used to be. So like, I think we can do a lot of good if we kind of have that perspective of like, yeah, this might suck right now. There might be things that are obviously not working within, our society or our government. And I think it's good to like work towards those things and like, addressing those issues. But I think it's also important to realize that like, that's kind of how human society has always been,
Mm-hmm.
like
Yeah.
there's always going to be imperfections and like, um, I think having kind of a realistic standpoint on that is also kind of healthy to balance out the the excessive need to try to make things perfect. Um, it's good to strive for that, but there is a certain point where that becomes a little bit like too much of a focus where you kind of miss out on like the good things in life. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. How you been doing with this stay-at-home order? Are you bored? You want to get back out? Like, what's up?
I mean, I still have work to do, so I'm blessed about that. It's definitely, more difficult to do work. Distractions are, it's not like they're easier to find. It's more that it's easier to get in that state of mind where you allow yourself to find those distractions.
Mm-hmm.
Because nowadays you're connected to the internet pretty much wherever you go in the US at least. So like that distraction is always available, but now there's less like there's less of that like I guess social pressure to like keep yourself from being distracted because everyone's being distracted.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And I think people are like, I don't know. I've never been like the person who communicates like digitally like this, but I think people are like reaching out more. It's a good positive because I think people are being more intentional at reaching out to each other and friends and family and things like that. But again, that's compounded by the fact that now you're indoors all day and you have the internet and you have Reddit and Instagram and all that stuff.
Yeah, I still try to walk outside.
That's good.
Every day if I can. And I think a lot of people have actually been doing that from what I've seen, but people are being pretty smart about it. Like everyone will, go wait out of the way if you're like coming towards each other on the street. Like most people just like walk into the street because there's no cars, so like, you can just walk into the street.
It's been surreal. There's my running path, which is it's a beautiful kind of like walking, biking, and a one-way road along Newport Back Bay. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
So that place is completely shut down to cars now. So it's been like almost liberating to be able to have full like distance of or full width of the road to do your recreational activity. But
yeah, sometimes I worry that I'm getting too used to walking in the middle of the road. When all this ends,
when cars return, it's been so clear lately these past few days. That's also been something that's quite like eye-opening is what an impact like this motor vehicle use has on the air. I've been able to see Los Angeles from here, and you're now not able to do that because of the smog and stuff.
Yeah, that's definitely a silver lining, positive to that.
Yeah.
Kind of reduce the crazy carbon output that we. I mean, it's not gonna last forever, but it's.
I know.
It's a small positive. You gotta take it,
Yeah, they had to. Did you hear they had to like the gas industry or whatever? They had to start paying people to take gas off their hands because that's just insane.
Yeah, how oil futures went negative for the first time in history.
It's just insane that's like a thing that all of this has led to.
Yeah,
I think at large people are obviously not to negate the fact that I think there's like a significant amount of people who are suffering right now because they don't have access to like I've been so blessed to be able to get just food from across the street from the grocery store, but some people don't have money to do that or they are in like not so good situations and things like that. So but hopefully for a good amount of the population, I think this time has been kind of eye-opening, like I said, being able to recognize what's important to individuals and hopefully come out to it a little more mindful person.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, I think, we as people like are kind of responsible for reaching out to each other. And it's been very nice, like you said, like being able to catch up with people I haven't seen in a while. And just kind of made me realize like, oh, like it's really not that hard to do nowadays. It's more just like a convenience thing that, I'm inconvenienced or something, or like I don't want to inconvenience other people.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
But at the end of the day, like everyone, like we kind of need like human interaction as people. Some people might be
Mm-hmm.
more introverted. Like I personally am more introverted, but like at the end of the day, I still need like some human interaction. Like it doesn't, otherwise you just go completely nuts.
Yeah, I think it's this whole social distancing. At the beginning, it was kind of like a pretty strict kind of blanket thing, like just stay away from people. But very soon, I think people started realizing it. Social distancing, like more like physical distancing, but like almost like social not distancing in a sense that you would probably reach out more often than you normally do to people, or just interact digitally. um, yeah, it's kind of interesting to see that how that kind of played out.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Well,
Cool.
I think I know you got to get going soon, so I don't want to hold you
Yeah,
too
man,
long.
appreciate it.
But
Yeah,
this was fun. Like,
yeah,
definitely hope you're staying healthy. Obviously,
yeah. You too, man.
yeah, and we'll have to do this again at some point in the future. And
Yeah, hopefully in person one day.
yeah, yeah, and hopefully you're able to take your test.
Yeah, it's been something, man, because I think we're us medical students are specifically allowed to take it. I think a couple of other, because we take it at Prometric, which is like one of those broad testing facilities that
Mhm.
also administers like the GRE and other standardized tests. But fortunately, I think for us, I think they've considered our exam essential because it's literally like a career stepping stone that you have to get done before you can move on to your next step. And so
Right.
I
Yeah.
don't think they want to completely do away with the generation of physicians
Yeah. That would be
if they can prevent it.
that would throw a wrench in the already wrench-filled medical system.
Yeah, yeah. So, yep.
Nice.
Fingers crossed.
All right. Sweet. Be sure to like and subscribe to Talks with Toe on Spotify, and also give us that 5-star rating on iTunes. Also, be sure to go to YouTube and subscribe to Talks with Toe. Talks with Toe is written and produced by Chris Toe.